The dust had settled thick on everything in Millbrook. By the time Sarah Chen arrived with nothing but a worn leather satchel and a heart full of desperate hope, the town sat like a forgotten prayer at the edge of the Colorado Territory, where the railroad had promised to come but never did, where dreams went to die under the relentless western sun. She'd heard the whispers back in Denver about the strange prosperity that seemed to touch certain folks in Millbrook, always on the first day of each month, always connected to old Father Miguel's blessed water from the mission well. Sarah had lost everything in the span of 3 brutal months. First, her husband Thomas had died in a mine collapse outside Central City, leaving her with debts that swallowed their modest savings like a hungry beast. Then came the eviction notice, the forced sale of their belongings, and finally the crushing realization that at 32, she was completely alone in a world that showed little mercy to widowed women. The stories about Millbrook's monthly miracle had reached her through Maria Santos, a Mexican woman who cleaned rooms at the hotel where Sarah had taken her last job before losing that too. Misha, Maria had whispered while they scrubbed floors together, "My cousin Rosa in Millbrook, she was like you once, nothing left, nowhere to go. But she learned the secret of the holy water, and now she owns the general store and sends money home to her children in Guadalajara." Maria's weathered hands had paused in their work. "Father Miguel, he blesses the well water every month on the first day, but you have to know how to use it right, and you have to believe with everything you have left." Now standing in the dusty main street of Millbrook as September's first day dawned clear and bright, Sarah felt the weight of that belief pressing down on her shoulders like a physical burden. The town was smaller than she'd imagined, just 24 buildings clustered around a central square, where a weathered wooden cross marked the spot where Father Miguel held his monthly blessing ceremony. Most of the structures showed signs of hard times, peeling paint, sagging porches, windows patched with whatever materials folks could find. But scattered among them were a few businesses that seemed to glow with prosperity. Rosa's General Store with its fresh coat of white paint and gleaming glass windows, Murphy's Saloon with its polished brass fixtures visible even from the street, and the boarding house where Sarah hoped to find lodging, its wraparound porch adorned with flowering plants that shouldn't have been able to thrive in this harsh climate. The early morning air carried the sound of voices gathering in the square, and Sarah joined the small crowd of perhaps 40 people who had come for the ceremony. They were a mix of frontier types she'd grown familiar with during her years in Colorado, weathered ranchers with dust permanently etched into the creases around their eyes, shopkeepers in clean but mended clothes, Mexican families who'd been working this land since before it was officially part of the United States, and a handful of newer arrivals like herself, who carried the desperate energy of people with nothing left to lose. Father Miguel emerged from the small adobe mission at exactly 8 o'clock, his black cassock swirling around his thin frame as he walked toward the well with measured steps. He was older than Sarah had expected, probably in his 70s, with silver hair that caught the morning light and gentle brown eyes that seemed to see directly into the heart of every person present. Behind him walked a young Mexican woman carrying a wooden bucket and ladle, her movements graceful and reverent. "Buenos dias, mis hijos," Father Miguel called out, his accented English carrying clearly across the square. "We gather again as we have for 7 years now, to ask for God's blessing on the water that sustains our community. But remember, the blessing is not in the water alone, it is in our faith, our dedication to each other, and our willingness to work for the prosperity we seek." Sarah watched as he began the ceremony, speaking prayers in both Spanish and English, while making the sign of the cross over the well. The crowd joined in where they could, their voices creating a low murmur that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath Sarah's feet. She noticed how some people in the gathering held themselves with a quiet confidence that spoke of success, while others, like herself, clutched their containers with the desperate grip of the drowning. When the blessing was complete, people began forming a line to draw water from the well. Sarah had brought an empty mason jar, one of the few possessions she'd managed to keep through all her losses. As she waited her turn, she struck up a conversation with the woman beside her, a tall blonde with calloused hands and intelligent blue eyes. "First time?" the woman asked, noting Sarah's nervous energy. "Yes, I'm Sarah Chen. I just arrived yesterday. Ellen Bradshaw. I've been here 3 years now." Ellen's voice carried the slight lilt of someone originally from the South. "I came here after my ranch failed in Kansas. Drought killed everything, and the bank took the rest. I heard about Father Miguel's blessing and figured I had nothing left to lose by trying." "And did it work?" Sarah asked, though Ellen's clean clothes and confident demeanor already suggested the answer. I run the local telegraph office now, and I own a small spread outside town where I raise horses. Nothing fancy, but it's mine, and it provides well for me and my daughter. Ellen paused, studying Sarah's face. But it's not magic if that's what you're hoping for. The holy water doesn't make money appear out of thin air. Before Sarah could ask what Ellen meant, they reached the front of the line. The young woman who had accompanied Father Miguel carefully drew water from the well and filled Sarah's mason jar to the brim. The water was clearer than any Sarah had seen, with a faint mineral taste that seemed to cleanse her mouth as she took a small sip to test it. Que Dios te bendiga, Father Miguel said, placing his weathered hand briefly on Sarah's shoulder. What brings you to Millbrook, child? I lost my husband in a mining accident, Sarah replied, surprised by how easily the words came. I lost everything else after that. I heard that this place, that people find new beginnings here. The old priest's eyes filled with compassion. Beginnings. But remember, we must plant seeds if we want to harvest crops. The blessing opens doors, but we must have the courage to walk through them. As Sarah walked away from the well, Ellen fell into step beside her. You have somewhere to stay? I was hoping to find a room at the boarding house. I have a little money left, enough for maybe a week. Mrs. Patterson runs a good establishment, but she's full up with railroad surveyors right now. They're still talking about bringing the line through here, though it's been talked for 5 years now. Ellen paused at the corner of the main street. I tell you what, I have a spare room above the telegraph office. It's small, but it's clean and quiet. You can stay there while you get your bearings and help me with the telegraph work in exchange for room and board. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. You barely know me, why would you? Because 3 years ago, Rosa Santos let me sleep in her store's back room when I first arrived, and she taught me how the blessing really works. Ellen's smile was warm but practical. The holy water doesn't change your luck, Sarah. It changes your willingness to take risks and trust other people. When you drink it with genuine faith, you become more open to opportunities and more likely to act on them. The prosperity comes from the actions you take while under its influence. They climbed the narrow stairs to Ellen's telegraph office, which occupied the second floor of one of the few brick buildings in town. The main room housed the telegraph equipment and a desk where Ellen conducted business, while a smaller room in the back served as her living quarters. The spare room was indeed tiny, barely large enough for a single bed and a washstand, but it was clean and bright, with a window that looked out over the vast expanse of prairie stretching toward the distant mountain. The key, Ellen continued as she helped Sarah settle her few belongings, is to drink the blessed water every morning for the entire month, not just on the first day. Father Miguel blesses enough for the whole community to share throughout the month, and Rosa stores it in special containers at the general store. Each morning, you drink a small cup while setting your intention for the day, what you want to accomplish, what opportunities you're open to receiving, what service you can provide to others. Over the following days, Sarah began to understand what Ellen meant. Each morning, she would drink a small portion of the blessed water and spend a few minutes in quiet contemplation, asking not for money or success to be handed to her, but for the wisdom to recognize opportunities and the courage to pursue them. Then she would help Ellen with the telegraph office, learning to operate the equipment and handle the various messages that flowed through Millbrook's connection to the outside world. It was through this work that Sarah began to see the broader patterns of prosperity that touched certain members of the community. Rosa Santos had started her general store after using her monthly holy water ritual to overcome her fear of approaching the bank for a loan. Murphy had transformed his failing saloon by using his blessed water time to really listen to what his customers wanted. Not just drinks, but a place to gather, share news and conduct business deals. Mrs. Patterson had expanded her boarding house by partnering with other blessed water believers to create a cooperative that could handle larger projects than any individual could manage alone. The prosperity wasn't supernatural, but it was real. The monthly ritual created a community of people who were all actively looking for ways to help each other succeed, who had trained themselves to notice opportunities others might miss, and who had developed the courage to take calculated risks. When everyone in a community operates with that mindset, Sarah realized, prosperity becomes a natural result. Her own breakthrough came during her second week in town. While processing telegraph messages, she noticed a pattern in the communications between various mining operations in the surrounding area. They were all struggling with the same problem, getting accurate geological surveys completed quickly enough to meet investor deadlines. Sarah had learned enough about mining from her late husband to recognize the technical language in the messages, and she remembered that Thomas had often complained about the shortage of qualified surveyors who could read the land properly. That evening, she shared her observation with Ellen over dinner. "There's definitely demand for geological survey work, but I don't know anyone qualified to do it. What about Jake Morrison?" Ellen suggested. "He's been working odd jobs around town since he arrived 2 months ago. I heard him mention to Murphy that he used to do survey work before some kind of trouble back east." The next morning, Sarah drank her blessed water with a specific intention: to have the courage to approach Jake Morrison with a business proposition. She found him repairing Mrs. Patterson's front steps, a tall man with prematurely gray hair and hands that showed the calluses of hard physical work. When she explained what she'd observed in the telegraph messages, his entire demeanor changed. "You're right about the demand," he said, setting down his hand. "I supervised survey teams for a mining company in Pennsylvania for 8 years before." He paused and Sarah could see some old pain flicker across his face. "Before I had to leave, but I know the work inside and out, and I still have all my equipment stored in Denver. What would it take to get back into that business?" Jake ran his fingers through his gray hair. "Startup capital mainly. Equipment transportation, temporary lodging near work sites, materials for mapping, maybe $300 to get properly established. What if we could find investors, people who would provide the capital in exchange for a percentage of the profits?" Over the next week, Sarah used her position at the telegraph office to research mining operations throughout Colorado and Wyoming, identifying which companies were most desperately in need of survey service. Meanwhile, she and Ellen approached other members of Millbrook's Blessed Water community about investing in Jake's survey business. Rosa Santos contributed $50 from her store's profits. Murphy offered $25 and the promise of meals and lodging for Jake when he was between jobs. Miss Patterson invested $40 and agreed to provide accommodation for Jake's survey teams when they needed to stay in town. By the end of September, Morrison Geological Services was officially established, with Sarah as business manager handling communications and scheduling, Jake as head surveyor, and a consortium of Millbrook investors as silent partners. Their first major contract came through Sarah's telegraph network, a mining company near Leadville that needed urgent survey work to satisfy railroad investors. As Jake prepared to leave for his first job, he pulled Sarah aside. "I never told you why I had to leave Pennsylvania. You don't owe me an explanation." "I do though. I was drinking heavily after my wife died, and I made some serious mistakes on survey reports. Cost a mining company a lot of money and endangered some workers. I came west to start over, but I never thought I'd have the chance to do survey work again." He looked out toward the mountains where his new job waited. "This blessed water ritual, it's not about luck, is it?" "No," Sarah agreed. "It's about becoming the kind of person who creates opportunities instead of waiting for them." Jake nodded slowly. 3 months ago, if you'd approached me with this idea, I would have told you all the reasons why it couldn't work. I was so focused on my past failures that I couldn't see any future at all. But drinking that holy water every morning, setting those daily intentions, it changed how I think about what's possible." Sarah's share of the survey business profits from that first month was enough to rent a small house of her own and establish a modest savings account. But more than the money, she had discovered something she hadn't possessed since Thomas died: a sense of purpose and belonging. She had become part of a community that actively worked to create prosperity for everyone, not through competition or exploitation, but through cooperation and mutual support. On the first day of October, Sarah stood in the town square for her second holy water ceremony. This time she wasn't desperately hoping for salvation. She was gratefully acknowledging the blessings she had already received and preparing to extend the same kind of help to the next person who arrived in Millbrook with nothing but a worn satchel and a heart full of desperate hope. Father Miguel's eyes met hers as he blessed the water, and she saw recognition there. "You understand now," he said quietly as she filled her jar. "I understand that prosperity isn't something that happens to you," Sarah replied. "It's something you choose to create for yourself and for others." "Exactamente, my child. The holy water doesn't change God's plan, it helps us align ourselves with." As Sarah walked home to her small house, she passed a woman about her own age standing uncertainly at the edge of town with a single carpet bag and the hollow look of someone who had lost everything. Sarah remembered that feeling with perfect clarity, and she knew exactly what she needed to do. Sometimes the most profound miracles appear in the simplest acts of human kindness, blessed by nothing more mysterious than our willingness to transform our own suffering into a source of strength for others. The blessed water had shown Sarah that true prosperity flows not from what we receive but from what we choose to give.